Last month we took a look at some cool British singles from June 1965. Now it's time to turn our attention to July, and July 1965 was a particularly great month for singles. So without further ado, let's explore some standout British releases issued that month. Let's begin.
Entitled See My Friends, here are the Kinks.
Just like Heart Full of Soul by the Yardbirds, released a month earlier in June 1965, See My Friends by the Kinks was quite a revolutionary record. With its Eastern-influenced vocal melody and droning guitars, it was one of the very first British pop songs to show clear influence from Indian music. Both tracks predate the Beatles' Norwegian Wood by nearly half a year, even though the Beatles song often gets credited as the first example of Indian influence in Western pop. It could easily be argued that See My Friends is one of the earliest instances of British psychedelia. The idea for See My Friends came during a stopover in Bombay while the Kinks were en route to Australia. Ray Davies heard fishermen chanting on the beach, and the sound struck him so deeply that it inspired him to begin writing the song when the band arrived in Australia. A year later, in July 1966, when Indian-influenced songs had become all the rage in Britain, Dave Davies lamented the fact that the Kinks rarely received credit for pioneering the trend that was then taking the British music scene by storm. The single got excellent reviews in the press, with most journalists agreeing that the song was bound to be a hit. But See My Friends ended up peaking at number 10, a very respectable chart position but lower than most of their previous singles, and the record didn't even chart in the States. But the song's significance in the evolution of rock and roll hasn't been lost on music historians. In 1976, the New Musical Express ranked See My Friends at number 90 on their list of the 100 greatest singles of all time. And in 1992, The Wire included it in their list of the 100 most important records ever made.
Won't you please help me?
July 1965 saw the release of Help by the Beatles, the title track for their 1965 film and the lead single from the accompanying soundtrack album. In a 1980 interview with Playboy magazine, John Lennon revealed that Help was written during a time when he felt fat, depressed, and overwhelmed, admitting that the song was a genuine cry for help. The B-side was a good Little Richard-type rocker called I'm Down.
Same old thing happen every day. I'm down. I'm really down.
The single received excellent reviews in the press. Record Mirror wrote,
"We have a feeling this might possibly be a massive hit. Film theme at a lively pace, with John on lead vocal, supported by George and Paul. Falsetto pieces towards the end of the chorus and interesting bass phrases. Solid cymbal work from Ringo behind it all. Later on, there's a sort of hush over the proceedings before the boys build up vocally once more. We found it needed a couple of spins before getting full impact. But it'll get more than that from the DJs. It's almost entirely vocal, no definite instrumental break. The lyrics are well sustained, though it'll take a bit of singing along in our baths to register. Must be a massive number one, of course. The flip is not from the film and features Paul. It's rather a Little Richard-type opening. Paul gets a lot of excitement going in good rock style. Marvelous guitar break from George. It's a raver all the way."
The single reached number 1 in Britain and in the States, and it went on to become a massive global hit, topping the charts in 12 countries.
In this dirty old part of the city where the sun refused to shine.
July 1965 also saw the release of the Animals' 6th single, and their first without keyboardist Alan Price, who was replaced by Dave Robery. We've Got to Get Out of This Place was penned by American songwriters Barry Mann and Cynthia Weil, who originally wrote it for the Righteous Brothers. But the Animals were the ones who ended up recording it and turning it into a major worldwide hit. The song became an unofficial anthem for American soldiers during the Vietnam War. It wasn't written specifically about the war, but the track was frequently heard on armed forces radio, and it struck a powerful chord with US troops, perfectly capturing their sense of frustration and longing to escape. The New Musical Express wrote,
"Looks like another big one for the Animals, especially as We've Got to Get Out of This Place is quite different from anything they've done before. A relatively quiet opening soon erupts into a driving shake beat, with Eric Burdon's forceful and dominating vocal underlined by an insidious walking pace figure on organ. The spirited climax features Eric semi-shouting exultantly, with the other boys joining him in harmony. The lyric of the Man-Vile song is also fascinating. And while some of the group's depth of sound has been lost with the departure of Alan Price, this is more than compensated for by the dynamic, punchy beat.
The song reached number 2 on the UK singles chart, held out of the top slot by the Beatles' Help. And it was also a hit in the States, where it reached number 13 according to Billboard.
And now, swinging us right into the heart of summer, here's a fab new single from the ever-energetic Dave Clark 5. This one's called Catch Us If You Can.
By July 1965, the success of the Dave Clark 5 in their native Britain had significantly declined, but the group still enjoyed enormous popularity in the States. Catch Us If You Can was written by drummer Dave Clark and guitarist Lenny Davidson, and it was the title song for their feature film of the same name, which was retitled Having a Wild Weekend in America.
From the film which stars Dave and the boys. A finger snapper, as they say, and it moves along like mad after the opening bars. It's really more commercial than some of his recent offerings. Easy to recall, with a strong group vocal and a dramatic beat. Could do Dave a lot of good in the charts. Good harmonica break.
Despite their waning popularity in the UK, the single helped the Dave Clark 5 recapture some of their earlier chart success, and the track reached number 5 on the British charts. In the States, Catch Us If You Can climbed to number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 and remained in the top 20 for several weeks.
You got this strange effect on me, and I like it.
July 1965 seemed to be an especially prolific period for Ray Davies. In addition to See My Friends by the Kinks, July 1965 also saw the release of this standout composition called This Strange Effect, which Ray wrote for Dave Berry. The song, with its haunting hypnotic atmosphere and sensual vibe, is one of the definitive highlights from July, and personally speaking, I consider this to be one of the greatest British singles of 1965.
Make this world seem bright. You make my darkness bright, yes.
The deliciously haunting melody was enhanced by some delicate acoustic guitar lines by Jimmy Page, who played on most Dave Berry records from that period. Despite getting some excellent reviews in the press, the single only managed to reach number 37 on the British charts. But the song was a massive hit in the Netherlands, where it reached number 1 and stayed on top of the charts for several weeks. These images of Dave Berry's arrival in Amsterdam are a testament to his popularity in the Netherlands, and the B-side, a song called Now, also ended up becoming a big hit in the Dutch charts.
Now you must leave me. Now is the time.
In an interview from the early 90s, Ray Davies spoke about this strange effect.
I suspect that Dave is a slightly better singer, and he got into the whole mood of it. I sort of had his voice in mind, because it's a similar voice, in a sense, to the way I sing, so I thought it would be nice for somebody like him. I certainly didn't write it for the Kinks, so he's a good interpreter of the song, I think. But some songs are written for a sound, and I think there's a lot to do with recording in the old sense using tape, and the amount of distortion you can get on tape, but the atmosphere. It's a very impressionistic way of making records. Right from the word go, I thought Strange Effect should have to have an atmosphere to it. The same as on Kinks songs like Waterloo Sunset. There's that film of that sort of gloss on it that gives it a kind of depth and mystique, like a fog. And I think that can only really come about using tape, physical tape, rather than using digital sounds.
I'll get away from here somehow. My pocket's filled with gold.
Those of you who enjoy some of those mid-60s songs which are now labelled as freakbeat may already be familiar with this excellent single by David John and The Mood. Digging for Gold was produced by Joe Meek, and the song has become a major cult favourite thanks to its inclusion on several freakbeat compilations over the years. With its strangely dark, gritty sound and unconventional lyrics, the track stands as one of Joe Meek's most celebrated productions from that period, and one of the most electrifying and urgent recordings of the summer of 1965. The B-side was another excellent track called She's Fine.
She's fine. Girl around town, don't bring me down.
Just like the A-side, it delivered a high-energy performance driven by some fantastic, gritty guitar work. The single got positive reviews in the press and was given a fairly decent promotional push, including ads in a couple of music publications. But despite that, the single failed to chart and quickly faded into obscurity until it was rediscovered a couple of decades later.
Waited all night outside your home, but I can't get through to you.
Another Joe Meek production that went completely unnoticed at the time but later achieved cult status was this B-side by the Honeycombs. The wild and frantic pace of the song has led many music fans to cite it as an example of mid-60s proto-punk, and the track had a clear influence on Rock Lobster by the B-52s, released 13 years later in 1978. Can't Get Through to You originally appeared as the B-side to That's the Way, a song that featured drummer Honey Lantry duetting with lead singer Dennis DL.
That's the way I hit the ceiling.
The Honeycombs had gained notoriety in 1964 as one of the few bands of the era to feature a female drummer, and they scored a major hit that year with Have I the Right, which topped the UK charts and reached number 5 in the US. At that point in mid-1965, however, the group was starting to be seen as outdated, but despite that, That's the Way still became a big hit, with the track climbing to number 12. It became their last charting single, however, and the song missed the American charts entirely. Despite their declining commercial success, the band kept going until they eventually called it quits in 1967. This A-side by the Searchers became their first self-penned top 20 hit, and over the years, many music fans have pointed out that the track seemed to anticipate the sound of Rubber Soul by the Beatles, released 4 months later in December 1965. In particular, it's often compared to George Harrison's If I Needed Someone. Not because the melodies are identical, but because both songs share a similarly hypnotic feel and sound. A key element in both tracks is the use of a 12-string Rickenbacker guitar, which enhances their droning, dreamlike quality. George Harrison later acknowledged that If I Needed Someone was inspired by the Byrds, who themselves were influenced by both the Beatles and the Searchers, so it's all part of a feedback loop of influence during that incredibly fertile mid-60s period. Drummer Chris Curtis later recalled that the song was actually recorded a couple of weeks before the Byrds' debut single was released in Britain. And according to Curtis, the riff was inspired by The Last Time by the Rolling Stones, released earlier that year in February. Record Mirror wrote,
This one was written by Curtis and Mike Searchers, who both sing. A very fine beat, following a slightly complex opening with lots of guitar filling in the sounds behind. They've done something startlingly different with that guitar sound, though it's difficult to pinpoint exactly what it is. A very strong melody, and of course, very professional.
Apart from being an excellent song in its own right, this A-side by the Searchers stands as a fascinating testament to a moment in time when popular music was evolving at lightning speed. Bands were constantly influencing and inspiring one another, often across continents, and that creative exchange helped push music into bold new directions. The single peaked at number 12 in the British charts, and it also became a top 20 hit in the Netherlands, Sweden, and Canada. The song, however, stalled at number 79 in the States.
Big L traffic flash. A zebra has escaped from Chessington Zoo and has been seen in the centre of Slough. Anybody spotting the zebra crossing? Anybody spotting the zebra crossing the road, please ring Slough 54321. That's Slough 54321.
More music on Big L. Big L!
As a curious note, July 1965 also saw the release of several singles featuring musicians who would reach much bigger popularity later in the 70s. This single by a group called Bluesology was written and sung by Reginald Dwight, who'd later change his name to Elton John.
Come back, baby. Come back to me, yeah.
The New Musical Express wrote,
5 teenagers from London who call themselves Bluesology debut with Comeback Baby, written by the group's pianist and singer Reg Dwight. It's a mid-tempo offering with an ear-catching broken beat rhythm and piano prominent in the backing. Rather an unusual disc in that it blends a basic rhythm and blues feeling with a faint jazz flavor. Worth hearing.
Bluesology were active players on London's club scene, frequently backing visiting American artists like Major Lance, Billy Stewart and Patti LaBelle. But despite staying busy as a live band, they never found much commercial success. The group later attributed it partly to their lack of image. Drummer Mike Inkpen once remarked,
"Reg looked particularly awful with that conservative haircut and dark-rimmed specs, though I don't think any of us looked wonderful."
A year later, in 1966, Bluesology became Long John Baldry's backing band, and a couple of years later, when Reg Dwight left to go solo, he created the name Elton John by combining the first names of Baldry and the band's sax player, Elton Dean. And as they say, the rest is history.
Baby, never say goodbye. Baby, never say goodbye. Love me in 1,000 years from now.
But Elton John wasn't the only future 70s star to release a single in July 1965. Future Fleetwood Mac drummer Mick Fleetwood also put out a 45 with his first band, the Bow Street Runners. Just like the previous single by Bluesology, the Bow Street Runners also received fairly positive reviews in the press, but the single sank without a trace. Alex Harvey was another musician who enjoyed bigger success in the 70s as the leader of the sensational Alex Harvey Band. From 1958 until late 1965, he was the leader of Alex Harvey and his soul band, playing soul and rock and roll songs and spending considerable time touring in the United Kingdom and Germany. Despite their success as a club band, however, the group never managed to make a dent on the charts, and this single was no exception. And yet another single which featured musicians who would go on to much greater fame in the 70s was this single by Alma Cogan. This was a surprising release by Alma Cogan, a singer best known for her string of pop hits in the 1950s. The A-side, written by Searchers drummer Chris Curtis, was easily the most rock-oriented track of her career, and her backing band featured future Led Zeppelin members Jimmy Page on guitar and John Paul Jones on bass. Alma Cogan released her first single in 1953 and enjoyed strong success through the 50s and early 60s, but her traditional pop style was eventually overshadowed by the rise of the Beatles and the British invasion. Ironically, many Beatles fans today know Alma Cogan because of her well-known love affair with John Lennon. Alma was 8 years older than him, and according to several sources, Lennon confided to friends that he was madly in love with her and that he firmly believed that Cogan was the reincarnation of his late mother. The single was well received by the press, but at this point, Cogan's career was pretty much over, and the single was a flop. Just a year later, in October 1966, Alma Cogan tragically died from ovarian cancer at the age of 34.
When the moon begins to shine, I can see that you are mine on summer night.
Unlike the more traditional Alma Cogan, Marianne Faithfull was one of the hippest female singers of the 60s, and this was her fifth single, which also featured Jimmy Page on guitar. The New Musical Express wrote,
Summer Nights is undoubtedly the fastest track that Marianne Faithfull has yet waxed. Her huskily trembling voice, partly dual-tracked, is supported by humming, hand claps, and throbbing rumbling beat, with strings entering later. It opens with strumming on electronic harpsichord, which punctuates the scoring throughout. Again, there's a strong melodic content, and the lyric is both topical and colorful. I was a little apprehensive of this disc, wondering how Marianne's delicate sensual tones would cope with the faster tempo. But I needn't have worried. She handles it beautifully. Another big one.
Summer Nights was a chart success, reaching number 12 in the UK and number 24 in the US. At just 1 minute and 46 seconds, it was one of the shortest top 20 hits of 1965.
Lord, take mercy, baby. Now I can really smile again.
And we will end this recap of standout British singles from July 1965 with this posthumous release by the Mark Leeman 5. Even though they never found mainstream chart success, the band was well regarded among rhythm and blues aficionados and had a strong following in clubs all over Britain. Mark Leeman's gritty and in-your-face vocal style resonated with many of the young fans who saw them live during that period.
About how I've been mistreated, the many times I've been abused.
Tragically, Mark Leeman died in a car crash in June 1965, and this release marked the premature end of a very promising career. The New Musical Express wrote,
"The recent death of Mark Leeman was a great tragedy, as demonstrated by the promise he displays on the disc that he cut shortly before he was killed. Blow My Blues Away is a self-penned title with an authentic rhythm and blues feel. It spotlights solo voice singing and blues shouting with chanting by the other members of the Leeman 5. The mid-tempo shuffle beat is emphasized by rattling tambourine, a worthy memorial to this young artist."
Despite the good reviews, the single failed to make a dent in the charts. I hope you enjoyed this trip back to July 1965. See you next time.